Good morning. My name is Annie Kamara. I'm a member of the committee. Thank you for being here. We like to say, as long as you keep coming, we'll be here. The festival is all about you, for you, and we thank you for reading, we thank you for coming, and thank you for all the support that you give us every year. We have to give special thanks to our premier sponsors, the White Elephant, Jill Karp, and the Nantucket Athenaeum, Molly Anderson, our executive director here at the Athenaeum, and her staff. And our volunteers. You probably notice, if you've come year after year, that many of our volunteers, you see the same faces. And we thank them, too, for their generous offer of time and effort and patience with everything that happens. Okay. Please read the long list of donors and supporters in the program, because these are the people who are our angels. We are able to do so many events free to the public, and that is because we have support from your neighbors, business people, people who live elsewhere and come just for this festival. We thank them all. This morning, speaking with John Boyne is Tim Ehrenberg. Tim's a wash-ashore from Wisconsin, and after college, Tim acted, sang, and danced his way across the U.S. He also toured with a USO troupe entertaining our soldiers twice in Iraq. These days, his company, Brand New Nantucket, provides social media and marketing services to many island businesses. He's the book critic for N Magazine and the festival's social media manager. He and his husband, James, have lived on Nantucket since 2013. Lastly, I have to add this. Tim is one of the most prodigious readers I have ever known. And when he reads a book that he believes is important, he sheds light on it like no one else can. He doesn't stop until everyone has read it in anyone he talks to. And he is very, very happy to be interviewing John Boyne this morning. Please welcome Tim Ehrenberg.
Thank you, Annie. Guys, I'm pretty excited to introduce John Boyne. John Boyne was born in Dublin, Ireland, and studied English literature at Trinity College, Dublin, and creative writing at the University of East Anglia, Norwich, where he was awarded the Curtis Brown Prize. He has published 10 novels for adults and 5 for younger readers, including The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which was a New York Times #1 bestseller and a Miramax feature film. It has sold more than 9 million copies worldwide. He is a regular book reviewer for the Irish Times and has been a judge for multiple literary awards. In 2012, John was awarded the Hennessy Literary Hall of Fame Award for his body of work. He has also won 3 Irish Book Awards for Children's Book of the Year, People's Choice Book of the Year, and Short Story of the Year. His novels are published in over 50 languages. His most recent novel, The Heart's Invisible Furies, was published in 2012. The Heart's Invisible Furies is a sweeping, heartfelt, coming-of-age saga about the course of one gay man's life beginning and ending in post-war Ireland. It's a novel to make you laugh and cry and remind you of the redemptive power of the human spirit. I literally hugged the book when I finished it. I did it because I thought of all the men and women who paved the way for me as a gay man in 2018 to be able to be who I am today and proud of who I am today. One of the best parts of the Nantucket Book Festival is that you get to tell a writer thank you for their piece of work. So thank you, John. In his preface to the 10th anniversary edition to The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, John writes, "After all, the great joy of literature, as opposed to politics or religion, is that it embraces debate. It allows us to have heated conversations with our closest friends and dearest loved ones. And through it all, no one gets hurt, no one gets taken away from their homes, and no one gets killed." Please join me in welcoming John Boyne. Hi. So, you got to Nantucket on Monday. What do you think of our little island?
Well, I have to say, I'm not normally much of an ice cream guy, but I am about 30% ice cream. at the moment, and the other 70% is waffle. So far, it's been very nice.
So I think it's...
I've just heard this word wash ashore. That's the first time I've heard that one.
Yes. So it means that I just appeared on this island.
Oh, okay.
Instead of being born here.
Okay, like Peter Pan.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think it's good to start from the very beginning, and I love first lines in books because I feel writers put so much thought into them. So I was wondering if you could read your first line, because I'm afraid I would maybe butcher the Irish towns in it. But if you could read your first line, and then we could discuss that a little bit.
The first line is, long before we discovered that he had fathered 2 children by 2 different women, one in Drimoleague and one in Clonakilty, Father James Monroe stood on the altar of the Church of Our Lady, Star of the Sea, in the parish of Goleen, West Cork, and denounced my mother as a whore.
That makes you want to keep reading, doesn't it?
It's all downhill from there. It's a good opening line.
So tell us a little bit about that first sentence.
Well, the previous novel that I wrote with adults in mind, A History of Loneliness, which came out about 2 years before, was the first novel I wrote about Ireland. Anybody who's familiar with any of my books will know that pretty much everything I've done has been set outside of Ireland. And I decided finally to write a book in Ireland. And History of Loneliness was a novel which explored the child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, which of course everybody knows about. And when I finished that, I felt I still had so much more I wanted to write about Ireland. It sort of opened up this floodgate in me, and I wanted to return to it. So I decided to go to start writing this, to start writing about the social mores, and I thought I would just begin there because it would be a nice link back to the previous book. Start with the church. The church isn't a big element of this book. To be honest, it could have been, I suppose, if I'd wanted it to be, because they would have had things to say about homosexuality for sure over the years, but I felt I'd sort of covered that in the previous book. So it's kind of connecting with the last one, but also showing that at the very start of the book, Ireland is a country which is just filled with hypocrisy, basically. And then because the novel is set over 70 years, by the time we get to 2015, and we finish just a couple of weeks after the equal rights marriage referendum, the country has changed a lot. And of course, this is 3 years later, and as I'm sure many of you know, it's changed even more over the last couple of weeks.
So leads great into the next question. After the first line in the History of Loneliness is, I did not become ashamed of being Irish until I was well into the middle years of my life. Ireland is a character in both of these books, like we just said. Can you discuss the importance of Ireland as a central character for you and why you decided to now kind of go there?
Yeah, well, you see, I published my first novel in 2000, and almost every Irish writer writes about Ireland. And that's not unusual. Most people write about the place they're from. And I just never had done it. I felt, I wasn't really sure why. Like a couple of years ago, if I would go to festivals, people would say, why don't you write about Ireland? And my standard line was that, I just don't feel I have a story to tell right now, and until I do, I don't want to. Now, that might have been the truth, I don't know. Maybe subconsciously I was frightened of writing about it in some way, I don't know. But I certainly did feel that I wanted to wait, and even if it meant that I would never write about it, that would be okay. I mean, I think if you come from a small country, you are expected to write about it all the time. If you come from the States, you are given more freedom, or even from Britain, you are given the freedom in a way to write about anywhere you want. But a writer from Ireland or Holland or Finland, you'll be asked, why don't you write about your own country? And so I think it was just maybe getting older, maybe getting more confident in my writing, that I felt it was time to start writing about it and to try to understand it a little bit better. And unlike the opening line of History of Loneliness that you quoted, I love being Irish. I love living in Dublin. I'm very proud to be Irish. So I don't feel the way that the character feels in that book. But like anybody, I guess, you can look at your own country and recognize its flaws as well as its attributes. So yeah, I just kind of felt it was time to do that. Now, the next one isn't going to be in Ireland, but for those 2 books, which are long books, together they'd be about 1,000 pages. It was kind of good to get it off my chest, I guess.
So let's go to church for a moment, because the church is another huge central focus in this book.
Yeah.
And I know that I've definitely struggled with trying to find some faith, belief, religion, because the church doesn't make it easy for homosexuals. Have you found any comforting words for
Well, except when
yourself?
they're giving them jobs. Ooh. Sorry. Sorry.
That's a wrap.
Apologies.
Have you found any comforting words for yourself in dealing with the church as it relates to acceptance for homosexuals?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think things are different. Firstly, let me just point out that where I grew up in Dublin, my next-door neighbour on one side was the parish priest, and on the other side was 9 nuns. And I used to have to cut the grass for the nuns when I was a kid. And I went to a Catholic school. You know, I was an altar boy. I was the head altar boy. I was very proud of that. And I think from my perspective, through my 20s, I guess, and most of my 30s, I felt this great antagonism, I think, towards this institution in which I had grown up. Partly because of the things that were coming to light, but partly because of the things I was confronting about my own childhood and things that had happened to me. And I remember, like, for example, because I'm gay as well, and I felt, I remember in my 20s, and even though, you know the way sometimes you know something is stupid, and you know, like, it's not true, but nevertheless, it sort of sticks with you. And I felt, you know, is the reason that I'm gay is because the very first sexual experiences I had in life were with a man, and were with a much older man. And if that's the case, and in Ireland, bear in mind, where homosexuality wasn't decriminalized until 1993, and you are feeling worthless, and you are feeling like a criminal, and you are feeling like you are not going to ever find love in your life, you start to look for somebody to blame. And partly you put the blame on yourself, and partly you look for others. So through the 20s, my 20s and 30s, I did feel a lot of that. And then somehow, I guess, when things started to change in my life, I met somebody and had a very happy relationship for many years. And a lot of that just came off my shoulders. And maybe that's why I started writing about Ireland then. You know, maybe I was able to. But I also feel, in fairness, you know, I'm not trying to just drag myself around the countries giving out about the church, because actually I do think the church has changed a lot. And I think it's changed in a very positive way over recent years. I mean, even in Ireland in the last few years with the equal rights marriage referendum, the church really didn't put up a huge opposition to it. And the day after it was passed, the Archbishop of Dublin came out and made a statement which basically said, hey, you know, look, we're living in different times. There we are, roll with it. And I think, you know, Pope Francis has been like a breath of fresh air. You know, in my whole life, I don't think not just any religious leader, but any leader at all, has ever said anything as powerful to me as those 5 words, who am I to judge? And it seemed to me growing up, and you know, if I was having this conversation right now with my dad, you know, my dad doesn't like Pope Francis. My dad's more of a John Paul II fire and brimstone guy. But who am I to judge is, if anything is going to bring you back to faith or religion or believing in somebody who is an authority figure in an institution, I do feel that those 5 words are incredibly important ones. So you know, even though I myself, I'm not practicing Catholic, and like most people here, I'm sure I have my own private sort of spirituality, whatever, however it works inside ourselves, I do respect Pope Francis quite a lot.
I think that's a great time to get a little taste of the book, because this is one of my favorite parts of it. All right, so this is just a short section from quite early on in the book. The novel takes place in 7-year leaps. So we start with Cyril when he's 0, when he's just born, and all the way up to his 70s. But this section takes place in 1959, when he's 14. And he's in boarding school, and his best friend, Julian, he's got this mad crush on Julian. He's crazy about him. But Julian has been kidnapped by the IRA because of something his father has written in the newspapers. And they've asked this big ransom. His father won't pay the ransom. So the IRA are sending back little bits of Julian every day in matchboxes. So far, a toe, a thumb, and an ear. And Cyril thinks that maybe because of all these terrible, disgusting ideas that he has in his head, that God is punishing him by taking Julian away from him. So he does what every good Irish Catholic boy does, which is he goes to confession. And this is what happens. There were a couple of dozen people scattered around the pews and staring into space, all of them old. And I walked past them looking for a confession box with a light on.
When I found one, I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and waited in the darkness for the grill to slide open. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," I said quietly when it did, a gust of body odor rushing toward me with such force that I reared back and hit my head against the wall. "It has been 3 weeks since my last confession." "What age are you, son?" asked the voice from the other side, which sounded quite elderly. 14, I said. "I'll be 15 next month." 14-year-old boys need to go to confession more than once every 3 weeks. I know what you lads are like. Up to no good every minute of the day. "Will you promise me you'll go more often in the future?" "I will, Father." "Good lad. Now, what sins do you have to confess to the Lord?" I swallowed hard. I had been going to confession fairly regularly since my first communion 7 years earlier, but not once had I ever told the truth. Like everyone else, I simply made up a collection of ordinary decent sins and rattled them off with little thought before accepting the obligatory penance of 10 Hail Marys and an Our Father. Today, however, I had promised myself that I would be honest. I would confess everything. And if God was on my side, if God really existed and forgave people who were truly contrite, then he would recognize my guilt and set Julian free. "Father, over the last month, I've stolen sweets from a local shop on 6 occasions. "Holy God," said the priest, appalled. "Why did you do that?" "Because I like sweets," I said, "and I can't afford them." "Oh, there's some logic to that, I suppose. But listen, how did you do it?" "There's an old woman who works behind the counter," I said, "and all she does is sit there all day reading newspapers. It's easy to take things without her noticing." "Oh, that's a terrible sin," said the priest. "You know that's probably that good woman's livelihood." "I do, Father." "Will you promise me never to do such a thing again?" "I will, Father." "All right then, good lad. Anything else?" "Yes, Father," I said. "There's a priest in our school who I don't like very much, and in my head, I call him the prick." "The what?" Sorry. That's God punishing me. "The what?" "The prick. And what in God's name does that mean?" "Do you not know, Father?" I asked. "If I knew, would I be asking you?" "It's another word for for a thing." "A thing? What do you mean a thing? What class of a thing?" "A thing, Father," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about." I leaned in and whispered through the grill, "A penis, Father." "Holy God," he repeated. "Did I hear you right? If you thought I said a penis, then yes, you did, Father." "That is what I thought you said. Why in God's name would you call a priest in your school a penis? How could he possibly be a penis? A man can't be a penis, he can only be a man. This makes no sense to me." "I'm sorry, Father, that's why I'm confessing it." "Well, whatever it is, just stop doing it. Call him by his proper name and show him a bit of respect. I'm sure he treats all the lads in your school very well." "He doesn't, Father. He's vicious, and he's always beating us up. Last year, he put a boy in the hospital for sneezing too loud." "I don't care. You'll call him by his proper name or there'll be no forgiveness. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Father." "Right then. I'm almost afraid to ask, but is there anything else?" "There is, Father." "Go on, so I'll hold on to my chair." "It's a bit delicate, Father," I said. "That's what the confessional is for, son," he said. "Don't worry. You're not talking to me. You're talking to God. God sees everything, and God hears everything. You can have no secrets from God." "Do I have to say it then, Father?" I asked. "Will he not just know anyway?" "Oh, he will, but he likes you to say it out loud, just for clarification purposes." I took a deep breath. This had been a long time coming, but here it was at last. "I think I'm a bit funny, Father," I told him. "The other boys in my class, they're always talking about girls, but I never think about girls at all. I just think about boys, and I think about doing all sorts of dirty stuff to them, like taking their clothes off and kissing them all over and playing with their things. And there's this one boy, he's my best friend, and he sleeps in the bed next to mine. I can't stop thinking about him all the time. And sometimes when he's asleep, I pull my pajamas down, I have a right go at myself, and I create an unholy mess in the bed. And even after I do it, and I think I might be able to go to sleep again, I start thinking about other lads and all the things I want to do to them. And do you know what a blowjob is, Father? Because I started writing stories about lads I like, and particularly about my friend Julian, and I started using words like that, and there was an almighty crashing sound from opposite me, and I looked up, startled. The shadow of the priest in the darkness had vanished, and in its place a beam of light was streaming in from above. "Is that you, God?" I asked, looking up towards its source. From outside the confessional, I could hear shouts, and I opened the door to peep outside. The priest had fallen out of his box and was lying on the floor, clutching his chest. He must have been at least 80 years old, and the parishioners were leaning over him, crying out for help as his face turned blue. I looked down at him, my mouth open in bewilderment, and he slowly raised a gnarly finger and he pointed it at me. His lips parted, and I could see how yellow his teeth were. "Am I forgiven, Father?" I asked. "Are my sins forgiven?" His eyes rolled in his head. His entire body gave one great convulsion. He let out a roar, and that was it. He was gone. "God bless us, Father's dead," said an elderly man who had been kneeling on the floor supporting the priest's head. "Do you think he forgave me, though?" I asked. "Before he croaked, I mean." "Ah, he did, I'm sure of it," said the man, taking my hand now and letting the priest's head fall against the marble floor, a tinny sound echoing around the church. "And he'd be happy to know his last act on earth was to spread God's forgiveness." "Thank you," I said, feeling cheered by this. I left the church as the ambulance men made their way inside. It was an unusually sunny day, and truth be told, I did feel absolved, even if I knew the feelings I'd hidden inside myself wouldn't be going away anytime soon. The next morning, I awoke to the news that Julian had been found. A group of special branch officers had followed leads that led them to a farmhouse in Cavan, and he was discovered locked in a bathroom while his 3 captors slept outside. Now, had I been a person of more religious scruple, I might have believed that God had answered my prayers. But the fact was, before going to sleep that night, I'd already committed a few more sins. So instead, I put it down to good detective work on the part of An Garda Síochána. It seemed like the most convenient explanation to me.
So I find myself not telling people it's a coming of age of a gay man because I don't want people to be like, oh, well, maybe it's just a book for gay people.
Well, it's a coming of age of a country,
Yeah.
I think, more than a person. He just happens to be the figure in it because of the fact that, I was writing this in 2015 and 2015. And because I knew I had this wonderful historical moment that I could finish the book on, which was the referendum of 2015. It meant that it lent itself to writing about a gay character. And I hadn't done that too much in books. I'd done it in a few, but not too many. It's not something that has defined my work in the way that maybe some other gay writers, or writers who are gay, I would, would have it define their work. So, sorry, I completely interrupted your question.
Oh, no, not at all.
By saying it was...
I think a lot of gay people have a little internal homophobia in them. Can you discuss how Cyrils' extreme homophobia and how he overcame that throughout the book? Because I think when it started, even from there, it was tough for him to say all that.
Yeah, well, I think it's sort of a fear and self-loathing, I suppose, at the start. And, I can remember when I was in school, and I was about 13, I think, when, remember Take On Me by a-ha? Yeah? You can see where I'm probably going to go on this. And I was completely obsessed with Morton Harket from a-ha. And I was so obsessed with him, but I was so frightened of this obsession that I made it my mission in life at that age to tell everybody how awful a-ha were and that they were the worst band ever, and anybody who liked them was crazy. And it's kind of deflecting, I suppose, and I was born in the 70s. Cyril was born in the 40s. So it was even harder for him, and he's just terrified of anybody finding out and what it's going to mean for his life. Also, the possibility of prison. It's crazy. I was in like third year in university before it was decriminalized, as I said. So it's pretty mad when you think about it. But yeah, it's mostly about how people are going to react. And the minute you say that, of course, the minute you say to one person that you're gay, it's kind of all over. There's no going back on that. It's not like saying, I don't like a-ha, and then saying years later they're clearly the greatest band of all time. You can't go back on it. So I think it's that, and there is a very definite moment in the book halfway through where the first half is called Shame, and the second half is called, well, then there's an Exile, but then there's Pride. That at the end of the Shame section, which is, 300 pages, he's basically saying, enough. I'm not going to live like this anymore. I'm not going to pretend to be who I'm not. And if you don't like it, tough.
Is there a difference between Irish homophobia and American homophobia?
Oh, I think there's a difference between American everything. And I don't know. I mean, I haven't lived here, so I don't know. I mean, I don't think homophobia is actually really there in Ireland anymore, and it seems to be gone. I don't think people care anymore. You know, our prime minister is gay, and nobody cares. It's not an issue. I find it's startling sometimes. You know, you watch from the other side of the world, and you watch the news programs, and again, I'm not in the business of going to other countries and criticizing their country, but for a forward-thinking, supposedly freedom, you know, obsessed country, it does seem bizarre sometimes that those who call themselves Christians are always the ones to tell you you're going to burn in hell. So I don't know, but I haven't lived here, so I suppose I couldn't really comment on it.
So one of my favorite parts of the book is how characters would appear and then reappear, you know, hundreds of pages later. Did that surprise you when they would reappear, or did you have it pretty mapped out throughout your process?
Not so much mapped out, because I don't really map out books before I start. I start with an idea or a theme or a character, and I prefer to let it to go in whatever direction that it goes. But somehow, maybe with the structure and the way that characters, you know, he would meet somebody when he was 7 or 14, and then because we would move forward 7 years, I could leave them out for a while and then return to them. I think every novel has sort of like it's got an engine to it, like, you know, when you turn the ignition or the carburetor or something, and that's what was really leading this book through it. That the reader would almost forget that somebody had existed. You know, I leave one character, you think they're dead, but then they reappear sort of 35 years later, and you go, oh, I remember that guy from the first section. And it's quite good fun to do, because, again, with those gaps between the 7 years, it also meant that I didn't have to, I could leave things without him having to really resolve them very much. You know, he could be grieving, and then it could come back 7 years later, and I didn't have to deal with the grief. He's already over it. You know, so it was quite convenient as a writer to do that.
What was the 7? I feel like 7 always pops up in literature, and that every 7 years.
They say that every 7 years we shed our skin completely, and we become, you know, different bodies in a way. But also somebody had said to me that if you look at your life, every 7 years you are in a sort of a different place, and life has changed a lot. And when I looked at my life, it was the same, but it was just it's a long enough gap, I think, between things to see a different person. There's 10 chapters in the book, and there's really 10 Cyrils. I think there are 10 different people. But if we look at our own lives, and if you think when you were 7, 14, 21, 28, you would look at yourself and think, that's a completely different person than I am now. I behave differently. My life is in a different place. I have a different job. I have different relationships, whatever.
So a lot of your books start with the perspective of children. What are the challenges and the joys of writing in the eyes of a child?
Oh, I really like writing from the perspective of a child. And my whole life, the novels that I've really liked the most have been novels that feature children at the center. I remember as a kid, about 11 or 12, I got into reading Dickens, and I got into the orphan books particularly. I've always loved books about orphans. For some strange reason, it's something that really upsets my parents. I don't know why. But I love the idea of children on their own in the world, having to solve their own problems and not have an adult do it. And those are the kind of novels I've always liked. And the books I've written with young people at the center of them tend to be books where the child is very isolated, very much on their own, no family around them, and they're thrust into a very adult situation way ahead of time. And children, writing about children and putting words into the mouths of children, it's not very different than writing books with adults. You know, I've written books with a First World War soldier, a bodyguard to the Russian Tsar, a captain on a boy on the Bounty. I've never been any of those things, but I have been a 9-year-old boy. And all those children that I put in my books, and who are looking at the world with this sense of awe and wondering, you know, what's going to become of them and what am I going to do with my life? I think it's very exciting, you know, I really enjoy the innocence and naivety that you can get with childhood characters. And in this one, when Cyril is 7, he's actually really the only grown-up in the house. His adoptive parents, Charles and Maud, are basically useless, and he's the only one with any sense in the house. So you can get a lot of comedy out of that as well. And I haven't written a lot of comedy in my books. Most of my books are very sad and tend to feature often elderly characters looking back at sort of wasted opportunities in life, which is kind of where I thought I was going to start when I was writing this at the start. I thought in my head it would probably be that he would get to his 70s, the referendum would happen, and he would be sort of too late for me, what a shame. But then it just takes on this different tone because of the fact that I was writing about a child very early on, and it's just something I enjoy doing.
So I found the book very therapeutic. I've always wanted a gay coming of age, even though maybe for some it was about other things, but for me that was what it was. Is there a book for you that was kind of therapeutic throughout your life, or something that really helped you through a tough time?
I mean, books in general have done that. I guess as probably a lot of people here, we're all here because we love books, right? And I don't know about you, but I bet there's a lot of people who, like me, were very introspective children and quite solitary children and found ourselves at our best in rooms like this, in libraries surrounded by books. And I felt safest in that way. There's a beautiful library down the road from my parents' house where I spent so much of my childhood. And it was books themselves. It didn't have to be about what I was going through. I mean, certainly there were some when, I guess every gay guy's probably read, A Boy's Own Story, Edmund White, something like that. But for me, it's other people's stories. I've never found that books have to represent me in some way, or that I want to necessarily be reading about people with the same experiences as me. I want to read a lot of the time about people who don't. In the same way that I want to write about, but one of the worst pieces of advice you can give a young writer, an aspiring writer, is to write about what they know. I don't want to write about what I know. I want to write about what I don't know, and I want to find out through the writing. Can I find it? Can I figure it out?
Mm-hmm. Okay, a little speed round here.
Okay.
Favorite book as a kid?
The Silver Sword by Ian Cyrils.
Book that made you cry the hardest?
The Go-Between by L.P. Hartley.
Book that made you laugh the loudest?
What a Carve Up by Jonathan Coe.
Your favorite mystery?
Oh, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie.
Love that. Book that you've read multiple times?
The Cider House Rules by John Irving. Ooh. Ooh. Mm. Yeah. The only other time I heard that there was when I said about the ice cream. So.
Is there a book you wish you had written?
Any of the earlier named ones, but in the last couple of years, Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. Absolutely. I'll just say this, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I said a minute ago about reading and writing about things you don't know, and a book like that, for example, is one where I'm a kid growing up in Dublin. I don't know anything about Japan or Korea or the last century there. And I love reading books where you can get lost in a story, lost in characters because they're so authentic, lost in wonderful writing, but it also opens up your mind to this whole new universe that you know nothing about and will sometimes take you on to reading other things. And for me, that is the joy of literature, when you find those kind of stories that you've never found before.
Favorite book of all time?
It's got to be The Cider House Rules. Yeah.
And what are you reading right now?
I'm reading Less by Andrew Sean Greer, the one that just won the Pulitzer, which is really good. It's funny. And you don't get a lot of humor in books that win prizes. So
what's next for you? Your new book, A Ladder to the Sky, comes out
It comes out here in November, and it's a novel about literary skullduggery. I suppose if I was to... Oh, another good mystery, The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. And it's a bit of a Ripley-esque book, but about writers. It's about a young writer who is very talented, but has absolutely no imagination. So he cannot think up stories. So he attaches himself to older, more published writers, and tries to kind of steal their lives, steal their ideas, get them to sort of fall in love with him, so he can manipulate them in some way. So it's a bit of a mystery, and it's a bit of a... it's slightly comic in its way. Hard to describe, but anyway, it'll be out in November. So
can't wait.
It's called A Ladder to the Sky. There's a biblical proverb that ambition is like setting a ladder to the sky. So that's...
So I have one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So if you could go back in time and tell your younger self something, what would it be?
Use better hair products.
I should have brought a crown, and then you wouldn't have even had to.
Very nice, nicely done. No, I think I would tell myself that when I look back, say, particularly at university, to just get out more. One of the hardest experiences I had in my life was the 4 years I spent in Trinity. And that wasn't Trinity's fault, it was my fault. And one of the best experiences I had was 2 years later when I did my master's in UEA in Norwich, because I had learned from my mistakes. It was in Trinity, I went there from school. And again, this was the problem with going to sort of an all-boys Catholic school where it was all rugby all the time. And if you weren't a rugby player, you were basically the guy who was being smashed into the mud by the rugby players. And you kind of leave school with no social skills. You don't know how to behave around girls, around guys you don't know. And when you start university, if you don't make those friends very quickly, you're kind of lost. And I was a very different person then than now. Like the idea of sitting on a stage like this would have just terrified me. I would have been out the window. And I would just say, just kind of lighten up, I suppose.
Does anyone have any questions for John? Yes.
Actually, I've forgotten what did he say? Oh, tits or tears, yes, yeah. Yeah, he sees these two girls sitting in the adoptive father when Cyrils arrested, and he sees these two girls sitting there who've been arrested with him. One who is well endowed and one who's crying, and he's trying to figure out which one his boy has hopefully got off with. His boy is not interested in either of them, tits or tears. So,
anyone else? Yes. So the question is, John Irving-esque, when she was telling about the book, and what does that mean to John?
Yeah, the book is dedicated to John Irving. And when I published my first novel in 2000, The Thief of Time, I sent a copy of that book to John Irving with a fan letter. I've only written 2 fan letters in my life. One was to the kids from Fame, who didn't write back, and one was to John Irving. And John did write back, and he read the book, and he sent me a very nice letter about it. And over the years, we've become really close friends. He's become a real mentor to me. And we've met many times in England or Ireland or Canada or America, and I was with him only last week. And I wanted to dedicate something to John because of how much of an influence he's been to me as a writer. I mentioned the Cider House Rules several times there in the books that I've liked. What I mean by it, I suppose, is what John has always written about is what he terms sexual misfits. And I remember as a teenager reading things like the Cider House Rules or GARP or books like that where you do find a lot of sexual misfits in them. The World According to GARP has a transgender character in it, and that was written in 1977, I think. Now, that's a subject which is very much out there. It's not in the 70s, and not in like a big mainstream American novel, and not featuring an NFL player who becomes, Robert Muldoon, who becomes Roberta Muldoon. So those kind of characters and reading about those really was helpful to me. You asked earlier about books that were helpful. I mentioned Edmund's book. Books like that were very helpful. But also the way he can just combine comedy with authentic characters and great epic storytelling. I really like that. And well, I try, and I've certainly ripped him off slightly here. It is my most Irving-esque, as you say. And 10 points to anybody who can tell me what my tattoo on my arm, it's the last line of a book, and it says, "We are all terminal cases." Anybody?
10 points.
In the world, according to GARP, we are all terminal cases. So, and the reason this is actually I've only got 2 tattoos. This one is a Kate Bush tattoo, because I'm a Kate Bush obsessive. But I only got this on Sunday in Toronto, because I was with John on Saturday, and he had just got a new tattoo on his inside of his arm, and it was the last few words of one of his favorite novels. And the forewords were, "Only found another orphan." Anybody can guess what that is? Yes, whoever said Moby Dick. It's the last of Moby Dick. And it inspired me, and I thought, okay, I'll get that. And then I'm seeing him on Tuesday, and I told him I got a new tattoo, but I didn't tell him what it is. So I think it's some excellent sucking up, isn't it?
So now I'm going to have to get a tattoo that says, "I realized that I was finally happy," because that is the last line in here. Any other questions? My friend Christina, I know, has a question, but I'll ask it for her. Oh, you did? So I'm not going to say who, but people that die in your books, is it hard for you to let them go? Do you know that they're going to die?
Well, I don't know they're going to die, again, because, as I say, I don't really plan. I let it build itself. But you do, like, the great thing about killing people off in books is that the character has to react to that in some way. There are a few that are killed and a few that live. But, every so often in the book, you're writing it and you think, okay, I'm coasting a little bit here. Something needs to happen. Something dramatic. I can't just have him keep walking down the street looking at things. And you think, I'll kill somebody. I'll do it.
Well, Maud was my favorite character by far. She made me laugh. I mean, she was in it for one chapter.
Maud's only in one chapter, but everybody who has read the book always says that Maud is their favorite chapter. Even last night, I was at the Nantucket Hotel, and the owners were saying that Maud was their favorite character. And she was fun to write but also she plays a very important part, because even though she is kind of crazy and eccentric, she's a writer, but she's an Irish writer, but she's a woman. And traditionally, there's a thing that goes through the book about the tea towel. Anybody who's been to Ireland will know, I call it the tea towel, but it's beer mats, it's calendars, it's T-shirts, it's everything. And it's the same pictures of these 8 great Irish writers. And what do all these great Irish writers have in common? They all have a penis. So there's no Edna O'Brien, no Jennifer Johnston, no Maeve Brennan, no women on it at all. So I wanted to represent the kind of character that has been overlooked a lot through the years. And one of Ireland's most difficult relationships over the years hasn't been with its writers, it's been with its women. And that's, I wanted her in there for that she would be somebody who was going to be, it's only after she's gone that she becomes this great sort of James Joyce type figure. But in her lifetime, she would never really be accepted as it. Having said that, she is the type of writer who goes to an event to read and decides to read the entire book to the audience. Because, you only, what's a sample? So she just stands there and reads it literally from chapter 1 to the end. So you're probably lucky I didn't do that,
Any other questions?
Not a question. I just want to thank you for writing the Boyne striped pajamas. I'm a little disappointed. It could never be the feeling that I got with the book.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Are we at time? Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks for coming along.